In this video, we're breaking down how two industry giants in darts lost control and let their power slip. The British Darts Organisation was a giant. For decades, it ruled the sport, creating legends and shaping darts into the cultural phenomenon it became. From packed-out venues to millions tuning in at home, the BDO was the lifeblood of professional darts. It was untouchable, or so it seemed. But what happens when an empire refuses to change? When the very players who built its legacy decide they've had enough?
It's a mess. I feel sorry for the players. Not particularly concerned about the BDO. I'm pretty sure the WDF are going to come in and take over.
This is the story of how the BDO went from the pinnacle of darts to its catastrophic collapse. A story of power struggles, rebellion, and mismanagement so epic it makes a double one bust look like a minor blunder. The rise, the split, and the bitter downfall of an organisation that had everything until it lost it all. How did the once mighty BDO throw it all away? The British Darts Organisation's rise was nothing short of spectacular. Founded in 1973, the BDO was the heart and soul of darts, elevating the sport from smoky pub backrooms to brightly lit television stages. Its tournaments, like the World Masters and the Lakeside World Championship, became the stuff of legend. The Lakeside, in particular, was a proving ground, a sacred stage where greatness was forged. In the late 70s and throughout the 80s, the BDO brought darts into the mainstream. Legends like Eric Bristow, John Lowe, and Jockey Wilson defined it. These players were icons. Bristow, with his cocky grin and unshakable confidence, was the ultimate showman. He could rile up an opponent and an entire crowd in equal measure, a villain to some, a hero to others. Then there was Lowe, the epitome of precision and calm, the player who made even the most nerve-wracking moments look like a casual warm-up. And Jockey Wilson, fiery and unpredictable, brought raw passion to the stage. Together, they were putting on a show. The energy was electric. Packed crowds, deafening chants, and televised drama that gripped millions. Fans lived for every dart thrown, every missed double, every perfectly executed finish. Darts became this shared experience, a spectacle that felt larger than life. But behind the bright lights, the cracks were already beginning to form. Prize money stagnated, leaving the players questioning where the revenue from sold-out venues and TV coverage was going. Television networks who couldn't get enough of darts began shifting their focus elsewhere, seeing darts as a relic of a past era rather than a thriving sport. The players, who were the very heart of this empire, felt increasingly frustrated and undervalued. The resentment simmered quietly at first. The players had carried the BDO's success on their backs, yet their paychecks didn't reflect the hours of grueling matches and the immense pressure of performing on a national stage. And then came the missed opportunities, the lack of innovation, the reluctance to adapt to a changing audience, and the sense that the BDO was more interested in preserving its traditions than securing its future. For players like Bristow, Taylor, and Lowe, it wasn't just about the money, it was about respect. They were entertainers, carrying the sport to heights it had never seen before. And yet, as the sport began to wane in popularity, it felt like the organisation that had once championed them was now holding them back. The frustration didn't fade. It grew, spreading among the sport's top talent. Beneath the surface, the tension was building, and it was only a matter of time before it erupted. What followed wasn't just a disagreement, it was an all-out rebellion that would change darts forever. The breaking point came in 1992, when frustration turned into action. 16 of the game's top players, tired of what they saw as stagnation and mismanagement, decided they'd had enough. These were the stars of the sport. Taylor, Bristow, Lowe, Wilson, and a host of other big names came together to form the World Darts Council, later rebranded as the Professional Darts Corporation, PDC. It was a declaration of war, not just against the BDO, but against the way darts had been run for decades. Their grievances were clear. The players wanted better prize money, consistent TV coverage, and an organisation that respected their role as the lifeblood of the sport. The BDO, in their eyes, had grown complacent, clinging to its traditions while the world moved on. The WDC promised to modernise darts, to make it bigger, bolder, and more profitable for players and fans alike. The split wasn't clean or civil. The BDO fought back, banning the defecting players from its tournaments and trying to strong-arm broadcasters into staying loyal. Lawsuits were filed, tensions boiled over, and the darts world was suddenly divided in two. On one side was the BDO, the established authority with decades of history behind it. On the other was the upstart WDC, a group of rebels determined to build something new, even if it meant burning bridges along the way. But the WDC had something the BDO didn't: momentum. Their events were fresh, exciting, and modern. They introduced innovations that felt revolutionary at the time. Better production values, more engaging formats, and player walk-ons that turned darts matches into full-blown spectacles. Fans loved it, sponsors loved it, and the players, finally getting the recognition and pay they deserved, thrived. The BDO, meanwhile, clung to its traditions. It doubled down on its old ways, insisting that it was the true home of professional darts, but it wasn't working. As more players defected to the WDC, the BDO's tournaments lost their prestige. The Lakeside World Championship, once the pinnacle of the sport, began to feel like a shadow of its former self. The BDO was still sailing, but on a sinking ship. By 1997, the battle reached its conclusion in court. A legal agreement officially recognized the PDC as a governing body for darts, while allowing the BDO to continue running its events. On paper, it was a truce. In reality, it was a turning point. The PDC was on the rise, and the BDO, despite its history and tradition, was losing its grip on the sport it had once dominated. The split wasn't just a moment in darts history, it was a seismic shift. The BDO's refusal to adapt had created a vacuum, and the PDC was more than willing to fill it. What started as a rebellion had turned into a revolution, and the darts world would never be the same. The rise of the PDC was a masterclass in how to take something old and make it feel brand new. While the BDO clung desperately to its fading traditions, the PDC leaned into modernity. They created spectacles, lights, music, pyrotechnics, player walk-ons that rivaled rock concerts in WWE. Suddenly, darts wasn't just a sport, it was an event. And the fans, they couldn't get enough. Crowds packed into arenas, roaring with energy, turning darts into something that felt alive and electrifying. The PDC's World Championship at Alexandra Palace became the crown jewel, a tournament that oozed prestige and spectacle in equal measure. Compare that to the BDO's Lakeside event, which, while still respected, began to feel like a relic of a bygone era. It was like watching a blockbuster movie and then flipping the channel to a quiet documentary. It just didn't have the same pull anymore.
I think the BDO's got a role to play, and it's not, I'm not being detrimental to them when I say I think they are the most important thing in amateur darts.
Players thrived in this new environment. Phil Taylor became the face of the PDC, dominating the sport and cementing his legacy as one of the greatest of all time. The Power didn't just play darts, he owned it. Around him, a new generation of players emerged, drawn by the allure of bigger prize pools, brighter stages, and the chance to make a real living. The PDC wasn't just winning the battle for the sport's future, it was rewriting the rules entirely. Meanwhile, the BDO was stuck in a downward spiral of its own making. Its events struggled to draw top-tier talent, with many of its stars defecting to the PDC or simply fading into obscurity. Prize money stagnated even more, TV deals fell through, and fans began to drift away. The Lakeside World Championship, once the pinnacle of darts, became a quiet echo of what it used to be. Even the hardcore fans could feel it. The magic was gone. But it wasn't just about the money or the production values. The PDC understood something the BDO never seemed to grasp. Darts had to evolve. Fans wanted drama, excitement, and characters they could connect with. The PDC delivered all of that and more. The BDO, on the other hand, doubled down on its old ways, refusing to adapt even as its relevance faded further and further into the background. By the time the 2010s rolled around, the gap between the two organizations was painfully obvious. The PDC was a global powerhouse, expanding the sport to new audiences and new territories. The BDO, it was struggling to stay afloat, desperately clinging to its history while the world moved on. The writing was on the wall and everyone knew it. The only question left was how long the BDO could hang on before it all came crashing down. The BDO's downward spiral hit its lowest point in 2019 with an event so disastrously managed, it felt more like satire than a professional tournament. The World Masters, a cornerstone of the organization's legacy, descended into chaos so profound it might as well have been scripted by a comedy writer. What was once the oldest major tournament in darts became a case study in how to lose the trust of players, fans, and sponsors all in one fell swoop. It started with a simple rule change. Players, including some of the BDO's top stars, were forced to enter the tournament at the floor stages instead of being seeded into the later rounds as they had been in years past. This wasn't a small tweak. It was a slap in the face to the very players who had given the BDO its prestige. Many of them walked away in protest, leaving the event without some of its biggest names. Add to that the fact that players were now being asked to pay £20 entry fees, another move that felt more amateur league than major tournament, and the cracks in the tournament's credibility began to widen. But this wasn't just about players being unhappy. The real disaster unfolded when the tournament organisers unveiled a draw riddled with errors. Fake names, duplicate entries, and players who didn't even bother showing up were somehow included. Imagine travelling across the country, or even the globe, only to discover your name wasn't on the list, or worse, that you were somehow playing against an opponent who didn't exist. It was so farcical that it bordered on absurdity. The logistical mess didn't stop there. Matches were delayed, practice boards were in short supply, and, in a moment that defies belief, players were asked to volunteer as markers to keep the games running. Yes, you read that right. Volunteer markers, at one of the sport's supposed marquee events. The atmosphere wasn't one of competition or excitement, it was frustration and embarrassment, with players openly questioning how the BDO could have let things fall this far. As if the chaos on the ground wasn't enough, the BDO couldn't even get the basics right. Prize money for the event was left undisclosed until late into the tournament, leaving players guessing what they were even competing for. Meanwhile, the organization's attempts to strong-arm players into signing restrictive contracts, blocking them from competing in rival PDC events, only further eroded what little goodwill remained. By the time the dust settled, the damage was done. The World Darts Federation stepped in, stripping the BDO of its governing body status and leaving it to flounder in irrelevance. What was once a proud, historic organization had reduced itself to a punchline, a far cry from its golden years. The 2019 World Masters was the final nail in the coffin, a public unraveling of everything the BDO once stood for, and from there, the fall only got steeper. The 2019 World Masters might have been a disaster, but for the BDO, it was just the beginning of the end. The fallout from that tournament sent shockwaves through the organization, and the repercussions were as brutal as a 180 against throw. Any remaining shreds of credibility the BDO had left were rapidly unwinding, and the organization found itself stumbling towards an inevitable collapse. The problems came thick and fast. Financial mismanagement had been an open secret for years, but by this point, it was impossible to ignore. Players were promised payouts that never arrived or were significantly reduced, leaving many questioning why they were even showing up. It wasn't just about money, it was about respect. And for the players who'd spent their lives building the BDO's legacy, that respect was in short supply. As the PDC continued to thrive, drawing bigger crowds and offering prize pools that dwarfed anything the BDO could muster, the contrast between the two organizations became glaring. The Lakeside World Championship, once a proud staple of the darts calendar, began to look painfully outdated. The intimate charm of the lakeside venue, which once felt like a crucible of darts drama, now seemed small and underwhelming compared to the roaring arenas of the PDC. The atmosphere of prestige had been replaced by a grim sense of inevitability. The final blow came in 2020. The BDO World Championship, a tournament that had once been the pinnacle of the sport, was moved from Lakeside to a smaller, less iconic venue. The decision was met with outrage from fans and players alike, but the problems didn't stop there. Prize money was slashed further, and with no TV coverage to speak of, the event felt more like a local exhibition than a world-class championship. For an organization that had once stood at the forefront of darts, it was humiliating. Behind the scenes, things were even worse. Internal conflicts and poor decision-making left the organization scrambling to stay afloat. Attempts to secure sponsorship deals fell flat, and with dwindling ticket sales and player participation, the BDO was running on fumes. By the time the organization officially declared bankruptcy later that year, it felt less like a shocking turn of events and more like the inevitable conclusion to a story everyone had seen coming. The collapse of the BDO wasn't just the end of an organization, it was the end of an era. For decades, the BDO had been the heart of darts, the birthplace of legends, and the stage for countless unforgettable moments.
The BDO, it's a shame, because they are the breeding ground. They're the ones that bring the champions through. You know, there wasn't one champion without the BDO. Not now, but there might be in the future, I think.
But through a combination of mismanagement, stubbornness, and an inability to adapt to the changing world, it threw away everything it had built. The PDC had won, not just because it innovated, but because the BDO refused to. The story of the BDO's downfall isn't just a tale of failure, it's a reminder of what happens when tradition outweighs progress, when leadership fails to evolve, and when the voices of those who matter most go unheard. By the time the final curtain fell, the BDO was no longer a giant of the sport. Yet, For all its failures, the BDO's legacy isn't entirely erased. It's easy to forget now, in the shadow of its downfall, just how important the organization once was. This was the group that gave darts its identity, its heroes, and its first golden age. Without the BDO, there might not have been a PDC. It laid the foundation for everything the sport has become, even if it couldn't keep up with its own creation. The fall of the BDO is a story darts fans will talk about for years, not just because of how it ended, but because of what it represents. The BDO thought its history would protect it, but history, as it turns out, is a poor substitute for progress. Darts didn't die with the BDO. It evolved. The PDC took what the BDO built and turned it into something even bigger, ensuring that the game would not just survive, but thrive. Because in darts, just like at the oche, complacency is the quickest way to lose. The collapse of the BDO marked the end of an era, but its story is far from forgotten. For decades, it was the cornerstone of professional darts, the organization that gave the sport its legends and its foundation. Without the BDO, there would be no glittering stages, no raucous alley-pally crowds, no Phil Taylor carving his legacy into the history books. The BDO may have fallen, but its fingerprints remain on everything darts has become. But for fans who grew up watching Lakeside, who remember the charm of its intimate setting and the raw drama of those early years, the BDO will always hold a special place. It may have faltered and collapsed, but its role in shaping the sport cannot be denied. The names, the rivalries, the moments, they're etched into darts history, even if the organization that gave them to us is no more. BDO's fall was spectacular, but its legacy is undeniable. And while the bright lights of the PDC now shine over the darts world, somewhere in that glow is the shadow of the BDO, a reminder of how far the sport has come and of the empire that helped it get there. But while the old guard has faded, darts continues to thrive, producing new stars and personalities that keep the sport alive and exciting. 15 years ago, Unicorn Darts ruled the sport. They created champions. Phil Taylor, Adrian Lewis, James Wade, all throwing Unicorn. Their boards were on every PDC stage, their logo a badge of honor. But fast forward to today, and it's gone. The legacy, the dominance, vanished. This is the brutal, messy, and painfully avoidable failure of Unicorn Darts. And the most shocking part? They might have seen it coming. Back in the late 2000s, Unicorn's player roster looked like a Hall of Fame lineup. Unicorn shaped the game. And they didn't stop at players. They also had icons behind the scenes. Legendary referee Russ Bray was on their books. So was Sid Waddell, the voice of darts himself. But Unicorn's power wasn't just in personalities, it was in product. Their Eclipse Pro dartboard was the official PDC board, used in every televised tournament since 1997. For more than 2 decades, the biggest moments in darts history were played on a Unicorn board, and their logo, front and center on every stage. By the spring of 2011, Unicorn had reached the peak of its dominance. They had just signed Gary Anderson, the Scottish thrower who'd quickly go on to win the Premier League. That signing gave them an unthinkable edge. Unicorn now had 7 of the world's top 8 players on their books. That kind of market control was unheard of. No brand in darts had ever been that dominant. And frankly, it looked like nobody was going to catch them. But Unicorn didn't realize it. This was the top of the mountain, and everything from here on out was downhill. In early 2011, Adrian Lewis was the sport's next big thing. He had just claimed his first world title, lifting the trophy in front of a packed crowd at Alexandra Palace.
For the world title, the 25-year-old Stokey, half an inch right. Half an inch right, and Adrian Lewis is dream.
He was young, fearless, and already being touted as the natural successor to Phil Taylor. And crucially, he was doing it all with Unicorn equipment. He had been with the company since the early days of his career, and they had marketed him as the future of darts, their future. So when he announced, just 10 months later, that he was leaving Unicorn to join Target Darts, it shocked the industry. Lewis didn't mince words. Target make the best darts in the business. That one sentence said everything. He buried Unicorn's reputation with a single quote. To make matters worse, Lewis then went on to defend his world title at the start of 2012. Just 3 months after switching brands, he won his second world championship, this time throwing Target Darts. For Unicorn, it was the ultimate insult. Their hand-picked future star had walked away and immediately proved he didn't need them. The switch gave Target the perfect launchpad. Overnight, the upstart brand had a 2-time world champion endorsing their products. And Unicorn, they had their first crack in the armor. This was no minor defection. This was a betrayal from a player they helped build. If Adrian Lewis's departure hurt, Phil Taylor's exit was a full-blown disaster. By 2014, Taylor had been with Unicorn for nearly 2 decades. He was the brand. 16 world championships, countless majors, every title, every record, every iconic match, all with a unicorn dart in his hand. So when rumors began swirling that he might leave, fans refused to believe it. Surely not the power, surely not after everything they'd achieved together. But then it happened. In January of 2014, Target Darts announced the signing of Phil Taylor on a 5-year deal reportedly worth £3 million. At the time, it was the richest contract ever signed in darts. And with that, Unicorn had lost the biggest name in the history of the sport. The impact was nuclear, but the story didn't end there. Even after Taylor left, Unicorn continued selling the Power branded darts. They launched a new range called the Evolution of the Power, still using his name and likeness to sell products. Taylor didn't take it lightly. He reportedly sued Unicorn for £100,000, arguing that they had no right to profit off his nickname after the split. It was a public, bitter fallout, one that revealed just how badly things had broken down behind the scenes. Unicorn had not only lost their legend, they had soured the relationship to the point of legal action. It was the moment many fans realized this wasn't just a dip in form. Something was fundamentally wrong at Unicorn Darts, and worse, other players were watching. Once Phil Taylor left, the floodgates opened. Suddenly, the invincible empire began to crumble, not with a crash, but with a series of slow, painful exits. The next to go, Raymond van Barneveld, the 5-time world champion and one of Europe's biggest darts icons. He had signed with Unicorn in 2009 on a 6-figure deal. By 2017, he followed Taylor to Target Darts. His statement? Target Darts feel amazing, look fantastic, and come in great packaging. Another high-profile name, another public endorsement of a rival brand. Then came Dimitri van den Berg, who had been with Unicorn since his teenage years in 2014. He won the match play in 2020, then followed it up with back-to-back World Series wins in 2022. Unicorn had helped him rise through the ranks, and just months after those wins, he left. Same story with Chris Dobie, who joined in 2016, made the Premier League in 2023 and left that same year. And then there was Joe Cullen. He'd been with Unicorn since 2008, a solid, loyal pro. He finally walked away in 2020 after 12 years. The list kept growing. Kim Huybrechts, Devin Peterson, John Part, all gone. Each departure chipped away at Unicorn's identity. Each one made the next easier. But the most brutal blow of all came in 2023, when Michael Smith, who had just become world champion and world #1, left Unicorn immediately after winning the title. He had been with them for 10 years. He won every major of his career with their darts. And just weeks after reaching the pinnacle of the sport, he was gone. Even more damning, Smith had signed the deal with Shot Darts, a much smaller company, months before his world championship win. He didn't even wait to see if Unicorn would match the offer. That's how little faith he had left. This wasn't just a talent drain, it was a collapse of trust. Players weren't leaving for money, they were leaving because they believed Unicorn couldn't take them further. That's a reputation you can't rebuild overnight, and Unicorn never truly did. Losing players was bad, but Unicorn's next problem came from a place even more dangerous, their own products, specifically the boards. The Unicorn Eclipse Pro had once been the gold standard. It had hung on PDC stages for over 25 years, from the late 90s through to the early 2020s. But as the years rolled on, that legacy started to erode. Fans began to notice more bounce outs, darts not sticking, matches interrupted, rhythm destroyed. Then the professionals started speaking out. During a televised event in 2019, Michael Smith, still under contract with Unicorn at the time, took to Twitter with a brutal public call-out. Sort the boards out, these bounce outs are ridiculous. This wasn't a fan complaint on a forum, this was one of the top players in the world actively trashing his sponsor in front of the world, and he wasn't alone. Simon Whitlock, known for using aggressive dart points, said he experienced far less damage and fewer issues on windmill boards. Even the legendary Eric Bristow had voiced frustration over the quality decline. The message was clear. Unicorn's boards, once respected, were now a liability. Clips began circulating on social media, slow motion footage of perfect throws hitting the wire and falling out. Commentators were voicing frustration. Fans started calling it the Unibounce, and slowly but surely, the narrative shifted. Unicorn wasn't just the brand losing players, they were the brand ruining matches. The final nail came in 2022 when the PDC officially ended their decades-long partnership. For the first time since the 1990s, Unicorn boards would no longer be used in PDC majors.
And then come round to contract renewal. There's obviously a commercial angle to this, but the reality is that Unicorn, as a board, took the conscious decision not to proceed.
There was no public spat, no dramatic exit, just a quiet, awkward parting of ways. After a quarter century of dominance, the Unicorn Eclipse Pro had been pulled from centre stage, and the silence spoke volumes. When the partnership between Unicorn and the PDC ended, many fans expected a statement, something bold, something that showed the company still had ambition. What they got instead was a quiet repositioning. In their official release, Unicorn announced that they were shifting focus, not toward new tech, not toward reclaiming the pro scene, but toward the amateur game. They launched a campaign called For Every Player, emphasizing social darts, accessibility, and growing the game at grassroots level. They cited a YouGov study that claimed most darts players were more interested in playing at home or at the pub than watching on TV. It sounded noble on the surface, helping the everyday player, making darts for the people, but to long-time fans, it felt like a smokescreen. This wasn't a pivot, it was a retreat, and the timing was too convenient. Unicorn didn't announce this when they were on top. They announced it after losing their biggest names, getting blasted for their boards, and quietly dropping off the PDC radar. And that's what made it hard to believe. If this was a bold new direction, why wait until after the entire roster had vanished? Why let the brand crumble on the bigger stages, only to pivot when nothing was left? The truth? They didn't choose to walk away, they were pushed out. And while the amateur campaign sounded positive, it was also vague. What did accessibility mean? Cheaper boards, simplified equipment, lower manufacturing costs. Even now, many fans remain unsure of what the strategy is, if there even is one. And more importantly, there's one thing the amateur market can't give Unicorn: prestige. You can't rebuild a legendary brand by selling starter sets, not when your competitors are making deals with world champions and flooding the televised majors. For Unicorn, this wasn't just a change in direction, it was the public confirmation of something everyone already suspected. The giant had fallen, and it wasn't getting back up. So where does Unicorn stand today? The short answer: nowhere near where they used to be. As of now, not a single Unicorn-sponsored player is ranked in the PDC's top 15. Their highest placed names, James Wade sitting at number 16 and Ross Smith at number 17. That's it. 2 players, both just outside the top tier. In a sport where visibility is everything, Unicorn has all but disappeared from the spotlight. Their last true marquee name is Gary Anderson, and while his legacy is undeniable, his best years are behind him. He's still dangerous on his day, but he's no longer the weekly threat he once was. Their dartboards, no longer used in televised events, no longer on the big stage, no longer considered the gold standard. Their rivals, meanwhile, are thriving. Target darts, once a hungry newcomer, now dominate the pro scene. Windmill boards hang on every major PDC stage. Shot darts, once a niche manufacturer from New Zealand, just signed the current world champion. Unicorn, the brand that once defined darts, is now being outpaced, outplayed, and outbranded. And even among casual players, the tide is turning. Online reviews often rank Unicorn products lower than their competitors. Criticism ranges from build quality to pricing to lack of innovation. What was once considered premium is now often described as outdated. The most painful part? It didn't have to be this way. Unicorn had the players, they had the hardware, they had the stage, but they lost the plot. They failed to evolve, they clung to their legacy while ignoring their future. And by the time they tried to pivot, it was already too late. The truth is, comeback stories are rare in darts equipment. Once you lose the pros, once you lose the stage, once you lose the trust, it's near impossible to claw your way back. Can Unicorn rebuild? Technically, yes. They still have name recognition, they still have distribution, and Gary Anderson still throws their darts. But here's the real question: do they want to come back? Because everything they've said and done over the past few years suggests they don't. They've leaned into amateur markets, they've abandoned pro sponsorships, they've stayed silent in moments where bold action was needed. And while making darts more accessible sounds like a worthy goal, it's not enough to revive a legacy. Unicorn didn't fall because of one bad decision, They fell because of 1,000 tiny ones, made slowly, quietly, and without vision. And now, a brand that once shaped champions is just another name on the shelf. The catastrophic failure of Unicorn Darts wasn't a one-day collapse. It was a slow-motion tragedy, and everyone saw it coming. Now, while Unicorn was collapsing behind the scenes, another institution in darts was imploding right out in the open. The British Darts Organisation wasn't just a rival, it was the foundation of the sport. And its downfall, way louder, way messier, and even more heartbreaking. Click here to watch our deep dive into how the BDO destroyed itself from the inside, through scandal, greed, and mismanagement. You won't believe how far it fell, and how fast.